Disintegration. Cleansing. The fires of 1,000 suns.
I shall extinguish them all.
Annihilation. Disintegration. Probable.
Hello and welcome exiles to my guide for the Impale Reap Juggernaut. This character I put off for a little bit just to play an instat KB for variety, but ultimately I was always going to come back to this character because this character is, quite frankly, it's really good. There's something that just feels so nice about being nigh immortal, being able to not really care about what's going on, look away, you know, play nonchalantly and just not die. And it feels good, and I enjoy that. Also, it does kind of a lot of damage, and it's relatively, in my opinion, it's more on the affordable end. We took Rational Doctrine out of the build, we took level 4 Enlighten out of the build, we took quite a few of the expensive items out of the build. There are still things like, for example, Awaken Spell Cascade. I believe this is somewhat mandatory for the character, so it's not a cheap build by any stretch of the imagination, but it also, it's not 100 divines. It's like, I think if I was going to estimate this build's cost, I would estimate in the range of 50 to 60 divines for self-crafted cost at this point, since I've cut so much budget or so much cost out of the build. That being said, there's going to be luxury items that don't really exist, like +1 endurance charge. I bought this for a couple divines because no one in hell is using these boots, and for me it was a cheap upgrade. But how many of these are going to exist on the market? Basically none are going to exist on the market. That's okay. Don't worry about getting +1 endurance charge. You don't need that for the character to function. It's more of just a luxury thing of, I was the one making the build, so I gotta buy a cool corruption because I was the only one looking for this item at the time. That being said, quite frankly, the build has so much more sustain if you just take these boots off. You can go for a much giga tankier character or version of the build if you go with different boots, and that is completely up to you. You will just lose a bit of speed and a bit of damage, and that's okay. Don't worry about that. You'll pick up massive amounts of net regen, and you'll still have a really good time with this character. Okay, that's the my spiel on the character. Let's get into, first of all, the POB I made for the character. It's pretty simple. I didn't go too intense about any of this stuff, to be honest with you guys. I try to keep it pretty minimal and try to keep it just bare bones basics, more or less. For starters, I go over the key pieces, the mandatory pieces. I go over pros and cons. I go over, hey, is this budget friendly? No, it's not. You need Awaken Spell Cascade. I think without Awaken Spell Cascade, Reap just doesn't feel good. For leveling, I don't think this character is a character you can really level. It's something I believe you should level as something else and then respec to. So, for example, in my tree, I only include 70 to 98 because I don't want people to be trying to level this as a leveling tree and just have a miserable time. I'd much rather you go and say level as a Righteous Fire Juggernaut, have a good time, have a smooth leveling experience, and then respec when you're level 70 and you can equip some of the mandatory pieces of the character. Other things I did is I included a guide on how to craft the shield and how to craft the wand. This I believe is important because these are more complex crafts. I did include some information for the craft for the belt and the rare ring, but everything else is basically unique gear, and this breaks down the important pieces to craft. On top of that, I could have gone over crafting for basically crafting these fossil ones, which are these, not fossil ones, these clusters, but I didn't craft them myself. I just bought them. They're like 1 divine for Master Fundamentals, Battle Hardened, and Force Multiplier. If they get super expensive on the market, I would definitely look into, click on Craft of Exile, try to figure out how to force these 3 notables and what's the cheap way to do that if they get to some ridiculous price. They probably won't. They'll probably be affordable. Now, one thing I should note is this character does have a Megalomaniac. I can't stress enough, Megalomaniacs, it's never about getting the exact same mods. It's about getting mods that do a similar thing and will work for the character. And ultimately, you don't need this to make the character function. I'll break down what you can do instead. So first of all, for example, destructive apparatus. We're only doing this for reservation efficiency. You could also go for the one that gives reservation efficiency for determination, or quite frankly, you could invest into the reservation node here, and maybe you could go for an Enlightened 4, and you wouldn't even need this altogether. Stuff like that you can look into if you want to, you know, say drop this Megalomaniac, say improve the build, say make it more high-end. That is on your own prerogative. Other things like Molten One's Mark, Max Rise, yes, this is nice, but ultimately, if you wanted to, something I didn't do in the character is I didn't spend a lot of time rolling my basically Eater of Worlds implicit, and I hit determination with unique enemy, and I said, you know what, that's good enough for me. I'm gonna walk away with that. Ultimately, you could roll this for Purity of Fire, and you could get another 2 max fire res this way. I believe we're very close to the break point of the 2 max fire res, because we have roughly about, I want to say 30 something aura effect. So I believe the grand Purity of Fire, just regular aura effect, it's like 27% or so. That'll get you 2 max fire res there, so that would cover the max res you'd lose from not having Molten's One mark. And Warning Call, this is nice for some extra armor, but also not mandatory. We have so much overkill defense. This is strictly only really gonna even see value in things like uber bosses where they hit you very, very hard. For example, outside of that content, this is not gonna make a lick of difference for how much you tank stuff. That's just the short info on that stuff. So that is giving you a rundown of things where you might look at it and say, oh, this is a really hard gear piece to acquire, but it's really not mandatory. And quite frankly, you can swap things around and even improve the damage of the character by doing so, and you'll be a-okay. Another thing I should note is on this character, I want to make an important note of this. I write it in the wand crafting section. Do not go for a prophecy wand. This, I wasn't thinking when I did this, because prophecy wand has an insane int requirement. It's like 245 at base. It's massive. Go for a lower base requirement, which would be, and this was, I was going to improve this wand. I was going to actually craft basically a wand with 2 more damage stats. Let's see if I have it in my fossil section. Yeah, I have it in my fossil section. This was the wand I was going to craft on. But get yourself something like a sage wand. It has the same base crit, but instead of a int requirement of like 240, it's 119. This means you will be able to, instead of going for a split personality with int on it, you can get a split personality with maybe life on it, or you forgo the dex and you get a lower level enhance, and you can have an entire other jewel socket in your build for improvements on the character. Keep that in mind, because quite frankly, getting yourself an extra 19% spell damage on the base implicit is not worth having another 120 int requirement on your wand. I got really lucky, and I didn't even realize this at the time, but when I was crafting this wand, I went to slam on a suffix. I hit reduced attribute requirements. I thought, man, that was a sucky suffix to hit. But later on, I realized that's actually kind of mandatory for me, because I was stupid enough to buy the base that has 245 int requirement, and it saved me being able to get the int requirement necessary. Otherwise, getting to 245, I was going to need another 70 int on top of what I already have, which would be really painful gear-wise. So save yourself the pain, go for a lower base that has a little bit less base percent spell damage implicit, but you don't need all this int on your gear, and you save a lot of power in your gearing by getting back like a jewel socket, or getting back the passive here, spending on the int. Stuff like that. It's ideal to get that attribute outside of the passive tree and on the gear, is my personal opinion. So I should just wanted to make a quick note of that. Other things I should say, you definitely want to Pride Impale. Just Pride Impale by itself is generally not too expensive, and you definitely want to try to force as much crit into this character as you can. So if you don't have the additional curse, I would recommend a Assassin's Mark over a vulnerability, in my opinion, because it's important to cap that crit, because crit is king when it comes to entropic devastation. As it's mandatory for you to impale, you also have to crit. Okay, so that explains that on the character. Now, for a few more details on the character, things like Progenesis, this is strictly a EHP multiplier. You don't need this. This character is very tanky as is. If this is too expensive for your budget, take this out. Say you can afford Awaken Spell Cascade, and then you have a few more divines. I would much prefer you put that into your gear than this flask, because without it, you're still incredibly tanky. This flask is really only a factor when it comes to uber bosses. I'm going to keep saying this over and over again, but this character is incredibly tanky, and layering more tank on top of what's already tanky, you're not going to feel in 95% of the cases. So things like that, I would stress, so that way you know to save gear cost. That's another thing you can do. I don't know what Progenesis is at cost-wise right now. It was like 3 divines when I bought it. Kobe made a video, went to like 10 divines. Recently, I think a week ago, I checked it. It was back down to 5 divines. I don't know, but something I should take note of. This is a later priority upgrade. And quite frankly, a Bottle of Faith would probably be better for this build, just because we need a bit of help capping our crit, and we don't really need the damage defense from Progenesis. It's just nice for something like Uber content when you actually need that extra mitigation. So, okay, I think I've covered most of the things there. The one thing I just realized is in my PUB notes, I haven't added a section on how to craft the body armor. I'm going to add that after this video, so that way it will be in the PUB as well. I just realized that. Okay, so that goes over the basics of the character. It's pretty much just Impale via entropic devastation We fix our crit with sandstorm visage and a high base crit wand because we are a Juggernaut. It's hard to get crit. We have to go for crit clusters. We have to go for crit nodes here. And we have to squeeze in whatever crit we can, wherever we can, because it's very, very important as we don't have a lot of crit available to us with this side of the tree. Also, on top of that, we're impaling, which means our damage ramps. Basically, the first hits don't do as much damage, but by the time we get to our 7th hit, we start having all that impale damage start to hit really, really hard and consistently. Other than that, that's pretty much the character. Eternal Damnation in combination with Juggernaut, elemental, basically armor mitigation makes us very tanky to elemental damage, and then you mix in Tempered by War, you split up that elemental damage, you start mitigating penetration from things like Shaper Balls, and you start meaning when you get hit by lightning damage, the lightning hit isn't 10k, it's 5k and 5k to fire and lightning, which means the armor from Juggernaut is even more effective. Stuff like that starts to really add up, and the defensive layer comes through. And then, of course, Annihilations approach, we stack a lot of fire res, we stack a lot of mitigation for fire damage, and that way we can turn on this for adrenaline for moving a bit faster and doing more damage. Ultimately, it's a bit of a meme to use these boots, but I still have enjoyed playing with them. You can feel free to make yourself a much tankier version of the character by just swapping to rare boots, and I will support you in that. You'll have no hate for me. That is understandable. Alright. Let's go ahead and get into one map showcase. I'll go ahead and alch this atoll. One thing I should say about this character is map mods we want to avoid. If we see them, we can run this. Map mobs we want to avoid is no regen, minus max, and less recovery, and fizz reflect. There are some mods you want to look out for because those will kill the character. I thought I should say that now because I have killed myself to those mods before on accident. It does happen. So you'll see the clear on this character isn't OP. It's good enough to basically just one-tap packs and move on, but it's not like... Oh, how do you say? It's not like you're shooting once and you're hitting everything on every side of you type of clear. It's not the OP level clear that you would expect in some projectile-based builds and stuff. It's not bad clear. It's not OP clear. It's just kind of mediocre clear. But I'm pretty happy with that. When you have a character that does like just absolutely insane damage on top of the fact you have just like crazy mitigation. What mods did I even put on this map? So for example, this Drox, he's gonna have extra life, AoE, attack speed. He doesn't have any damage multiplier, so he's never going to touch us at all. We have so much fizz mitigation, it's not gonna matter. So we'll go ahead and just finish him off because I don't want to like waste your guys' time watching me try to tank this guy because he's never going to do damage to us. He's a fizz-based boss. He's just never going to touch us. It's not going to happen. Also, I wanted to let that spell echo wear off so we weren't like just overpowering the fight via a shrine. It's a little bit like cheesing the showcase of what the character is. But if I'm not stressing it well enough, the thing I want you guys to take away from this character is it's super tanky, super feels good to play because you can kind of ignore what's going on. You can say you dash into a pack and you like, I don't know, your baby starts screaming. You have to go check on your baby. You can go do that and you're not going to die because unless you're taking like extremely heavy hits, the monsters are never going to do enough damage to outpower your regen or outpower your untiring. If there's a bunch of monsters that deal physical damage, they're actually straight up just healing you. They're making you heal faster than you would otherwise. And that to me is a relaxing concept, I would say. It's something I like about a lot about builds. Does that rare not die? What the hell? But yeah, anyways, as I was saying, it's a character I've enjoyed a lot this league. I have a very high opinion of it. I really like the Hex Blaster, but this character right now is probably my favorite build of the league just because of I got to use a lot of the cool new uniques and I enjoyed using them, and then on top of that, it's a character that just feels so dang good to play because we just don't die. It just doesn't matter what's going on the screen, and on top of that, we're doing a decent amount of damage. So that's all I'm saying. It's just a character I can highly recommend actually because I'm very, very happy with how it turned out, and ultimately it wasn't a over-the-top crazy budget. In my opinion, it was more it's more on the tame side of things in terms of price per power. It felt pretty good to me. That's my opinion of it, and that's why I recommend it. So hopefully you've enjoyed this video, and hopefully if you guys do play this build, you actually enjoy it as much as I did. It was a really strong, really fun character for me, and as always, thanks for watching, Exiles. Take care and peace out. Have a good night.